You know, these days I'm starting to see more and more musicians in my part of the world starting to speak up and speak out and then follow it by saying, I can't be quiet anymore. I don't care anymore. I just can't be quiet. And when I say this, I'm not talking about household name musicians. I'm not talking about people that we all know on a first name basis. I'm talking about people that I know on a first name basis. People who have finally had enough and they're like, you know what? I don't care if I ever play the county fair again. I just can't be quiet about this because we've reached a point where we can't be quiet. And the other day, a funny story, I Googled my own name just to see if there were any articles being written. I do that from time to time. And someone had written one that said that I was a very popular YouTuber with a very large YouTube channel. And I thought, yeah, that's true. But what a lot of people still don't know is that I spent over 20 years of my life playing in dive bars in East Tennessee. I reference it a lot in my content, and I'll have people reach out and say, oh, I didn't know you was a musician. And I just take it for granted that everyone knows because I spent so much of my life doing it. I just automatically assume that everyone knows what I'm talking about in my videos. So I apologize if anyone's ever been like, what's he talking about playing in dive bars? Well, that's where that I grew up. And here's how it happened. Back when I was 15 years old, that'd be around 1995 or so, I started writing poems down on paper and just trying to get my thoughts out, just writing poems on paper. A year or so later, I discovered a guitar, and I realized that if I took that guitar and those poems and put them together, if I set those poems to music, then I'd be a songwriter like Hank Williams Sr., and he was one of my heroes, so I thought that would be cool to be a songwriter. Then I saw Freebird the movie in 1996 and lost my mind. When I saw Alan Collins and Gary Roston, Steve Gaines, Ed King, guys like that play their guitars that way, I had to have an electric and I had to do that. So I formed a bunch of garage bands, and for the next 3 years I spent my time just woodshedding in people's garages. Until finally in 1999 I went out and played my very first gig. And then that same year I walked into a bar room for the first time at 19 years old and played my first gig in front of an audience. And then I spent the next 20 some years doing that. And looking back at it in hindsight, I realized that I was a kid that walked in those places. And I realized that I grew up in those places. And I learned a lot about life in those places. And I learned a lot of bad habits in those places. I made a whole lot of mistakes in those places. But I also learned how to work an audience. And I learned how to play my guitar. And I learned how to write songs. And I learned how to write them as I lived them. And it was definitely life lessons all the way through. But the entire time that I was that kid, pounding out the country music and the honky tonks, I was also the kid who was very politically motivated. I was also the kid that in his early 20s started writing blogs on a blogging site that I found. And I began writing my politics back then because, like I've said here on the channel, I've been talking it all my life. So for the longest time, those two different me's was kind of going right alongside each other. You had the one that was sitting there writing, my political opinions and my social commentary. And then over here, you had the one that was out partying it up and living rough and rowdy in these honky-tonk bars. And so it was kind of like two parallels going at the same time. But once 2020 hit and the pandemic came along, right in there is when I just realized that I couldn't be quiet anymore. I just realized that I could no longer be quiet because before then, I would write songs that I felt like would get the point across. I felt like that people would realize what side of the aisle that I fell on, but I didn't come right out and say it. I didn't come right out with it until 2020 when it was like, you know what? I can no longer hold this back. I've just got to start talking. And so that's what led us to Tennessee Brando and led us to this part of the show. But I'm seeing more and more, and I'm meeting more and more musicians who's having that same realization, which is, you know what? I just can't stay quiet any longer. I just can't not talk about the issues at hand because they're too important. And so recently I met Charlie Bacall. She is a singer-songwriter out of Ohio. She went to Nashville for a while and chased the dream like so many of us have done. I didn't do that, by the way, but she did. I didn't chase the dream in Nashville. I just lived the cold hard reality in East Tennessee, and that's another book and a whole nother podcast. But I met Charlie, and she and I wrote the song "Hating Nazis." That's here on YouTube, and she made the video for that song. But she and I sat down over on my Patreon, and we talked for like an hour, right at an hour, about her decision to finally speak up and speak out. And so I want to take you to a couple of clips from this interview because I think you all really enjoy it. So let's start right here with her talking about, I asked her what it was like to finally speak up and speak out and how it was when the people started to turn on her. Take a look.
Well, it's been stressful but liberating.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a long time I just didn't feel like I was me. In the
Yeah.
music is, keep your mouth shut, don't say what you think, and believe, and all for that advancement. Because I'm a songwriter, and I just got to the point where I didn't really like me anymore. I wasn't the old me. I wasn't who I was ever since I was a little kid, where I would always stick up for people, the underdog, whoever, stand up for what was right, even if it wasn't to my advantage. And I've kind of been doing that my whole life. And I felt very constricted in the music business
Yeah.
more my whole life.
I know exactly what she's talking about, the feelings of confinement that you feel when you're in the music business, especially if you're in red states where you're playing country bars, where you're expected to play country music. Everybody interprets country music as right leaning. And even though you could point out to them Johnny Cash songs, Merle Haggard songs, Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, you could point out so many outlaw country songs that would piss them off today. Hell, Saturday Night Special by Leonard Skinner would really piss them off if it was written today. You can point out those songs all day long, but when you're playing in that type of environment, you're just automatically expected to be of the right wing. And so I just had moments near the end, and don't get me wrong, I've done some cool things. I got to open up for a lot of my heroes and be on a lot of cool stages. I met a lot of great musicians, wrote a lot of great songs with a lot of cool people, shared the stage with a lot of cool people, shared other things with a lot of cool people. I had a great time. I'm not saying that I didn't have a good time, but there just come a point where it began to absolutely just suck the life out of me to go out and sit for 3 hours playing to 5 or 6 people right up front that was really into liking what I was doing and supporting what I was doing, and I'm truly grateful for all of them. But then to have 50 or 60 people in the background just chattering, and I was just background noise for their night. And it really began to drain me. And so I know exactly where she's coming from when she talks about that confinement and feeling constricted, because you really are. You're not expected to ever step outside of that bubble. You're just expected to be a live jukebox. But what she said in this next section of the interview was probably my favorite moment from the interview, where she talked about how that she had to speak up because it just feels like these days that we are in an abusive relationship with Donald Trump. Take a look at this.
It just got to the point where, because people said, why would you do this? Why are you putting yourself in this position for all this hate and abuse? And I thought about that a lot. Like, I could just shut up and sit back and wait and see what happens and not take the abuse. And I kept thinking, why am I saying stuff? Why am I taking this? And I realized it was because I couldn't be quiet. It hurt worse to be quiet than it hurts to speak up and take the abuse. We are in an abusive relationship with our country. I mean, I've been abused. I was abused growing up, and I've been in abusive relationships. One really, really bad, and this is so reminiscent of that. The gaslighting, the lies, the fear of even the physical threats and everything is, and you see people getting physically for real attacked. So I would think we're just in a really abusive relationship with this administration. That's what Trump reminds me of too. It's like he for years we've been being called names, right, for being Democrats, just constantly libtards and this and that, insulting us. Oh, we hate this country. We don't want what's best for this country. We want to run it into the ground. All these horrible things, which is completely untrue. And then Trump's like, well, why don't you love me? You know, he bashes us and bashes us. Then he doesn't understand why the Democrats don't stand up for him and clap for him. It's just something, he's very fundamentally damaged in his brain to think that, you keep punching somebody and saying, love me.
And I went on to say in that interview that that is one of the best analogies I've ever heard on Donald Trump. That does feel like we're in that kind of relationship with him where he just constantly berates and punches down at us and calls us names and then sits back and says, "Why don't you love me?" I've never heard it put quite that way, but I loved it. And I also really related to the part where she said, people said to her, "Why would you put yourself in this kind of situation?" That happened to me. When I first began to make these kind of videos, I had so many people. There was two groups. There was one going, "Wow, that was really cool. You should keep doing that." And there was the others that was like, "Wait a minute. If you do that, you're going to lose every gig that you have." And I was just to the point that I did not care anymore because I was just like Charlie. It hurt too more. It hurt way worse to be quiet about it all than it did to speak out. Yeah, I've lost plenty of friends over it. Yeah, I've lost plenty of connections over it. Yes, I've got a lot of hate mail over it. Yes, I've got death threats over it. But the further I've went with it, none of those things that happened after the fact hurt worse than when I was being quiet about it. And so to everyone that's like, "I don't know why he did that after all those years of entertaining us in this part of the world. Why would he suddenly just turn and go in the opposite direction?" It's because I could not stay quiet and watch my country circle the drain. And I'm seeing more musicians in my neck of the woods. Again, I'm not talking about the household names out there. I'm just seeing more musicians that are sick and tired of going out there and putting all the time and energy that it takes into being a musician. People don't understand the amount of money a musician spends on equipment, the amount of hours they spend rehearsing and getting everything right, and the amount of travel they do only to go to a place. And then, a lot of times, like I said, a lot of times play to audiences that really don't even give a shit whether they're not there or not. They're just background music. I mean, I saw a meme one time that said, a musician is a person who'll put, $5,000 worth of equipment into a so many $1,000 car and drive this many miles to make $100, and that's what a lot of people are going through. And they've just reached a point where they can't be quiet about it anymore. And so they're speaking up and speaking out. So I'm going to put this out here. I'm just going to throw this right out there to people who know me, to people in our part of the world who are tired, to the ones that I'm seeing starting to speak out. And I'll just say this. If you ever decide to just go full-blown balls to the wall with it, I'll be more than happy to bring you on the channel and talk with you and let people hear your music and let people hear what you're about, because I know how it feels to have people stab you in the back, and I know how it feels to have people turn on you because of your political views. So fuck those motherfuckers, and I don't care who gets offended at those words. Fuck them. You can speak up. You can say your truth. You can be who you want to be and who you truly are. You can be who you truly are, and you don't have to kiss their ass to be part of their show. You don't have to bow to them. And, no, I don't have the audiences that I used to play to anymore. But I got over 600,000. We're headed towards 700,000 people that have tuned in to hear what I have to say. So speak your truth. Be true to yourself and let the rest of it fall, because I would rather die on this hill than to die in those places being quiet about the issues that truly matter. So if you enjoyed those few clips that I showed you of Charlie, be sure to check out my Patreon. It's in the link below. I do a show on Patreon called Serious Honk, and I'll tell you really quick where that name came from. Back in 2020, I was asked to do an internet radio show, and I was told to come up with a name for my show. I picked the name Serious Honk, and the reason why I picked that name is because years ago I was playing in this little dive bar in Jellicoe, Tennessee, and at the end of the night, me and the band had one of the best performances we ever did. We were totally on point that night. And this dude comes walking up to us. He looks like a Dollar General Steve Austin, and he just flexed his muscles at us, and he went, "You boys was pumping out some serious honk." And we just lost it laughing. And I told my buddy, I said, we need to make an album called Pumping Out Some Serious Honk. Well, we never got around to doing that. And so when I started doing the music show on the internet, I decided to call it Serious Honk. And that internet station is no longer around. I really miss it. But it's no longer with us, and so I decided to start the music show back on Patreon, and I've been interviewing my musician buddies over there, and we've had a lot of non-political conversations. I've brought musicians on that said, I don't want to talk politics, and we just sat and talked about our love for Merle Haggard and our love for cigars and pro wrestling. So if you like those kind of conversations and you want to hear more of this one with Charlie Bacall, go over to Patreon and check us out over there, because I've been doing the music stuff a lot over there and really been enjoying it. But I truly do appreciate all the ones who was my friends all the way through all of it and who stood by me and who are still with me. I know who you are. I haven't forgot you. And to the ones who fell off, you didn't matter to begin with, and I do not miss you or love you anymore.